The cold was a constant companion. It lived in her bones, a dull ache that never truly faded. It seeped through the threadbare wool of her tunic and clung to her skin like a second, crueler layer. Alara squeezed the dirty water from the rag, her knuckles raw and split, the icy dampness a familiar agony. The stone floor of the great hall was vast and unforgiving, stretching out like a frozen lake under the weak winter light. They called her the ghost of Stonefang, an Omega orphan left on their doorstep 18 winters ago, a burden they never let her forget. She was less than a servant, more of a fixture, something to be ignored until a mess needed cleaning or a cruel word needed a target. Worthless. The word was a brand on her soul, whispered in the halls and hissed in her face so often she had started to believe it. Her stomach was a tight, aching knot of hunger. Breakfast had been a crust of stale bread she had eaten while hiding in the pantry, and dinner was a distant, uncertain promise. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the rhythmic scrape and splash of her work. Move forward, scrub, wipe, repeat. It was a litany that kept the despair at bay, a physical act to silence the screaming emptiness inside. The heavy oak doors of the hall slammed open, letting in a swirl of snow and a gust of wind that sliced like claws. Alara flinched, curling into herself as if to disappear into the stones. 3 figures stood silhouetted against the white fury of the blizzard outside. Lyra, the pack alpha's daughter, flanked by her 2 sneering companions. Look at it. Lyra's voice was sharp and brittle, like ice cracking underfoot. Still scrubbing. Do you ever do anything else, little mouse? Alara kept her eyes down, her focus locked on the grimy patch of floor in front of her. Acknowledging them only made it worse. Silence was her only shield, flimsy as it was. A finely booted foot kicked the wooden bucket, sending a wave of sludgy, freezing water splashing over Alara's legs and pooling around her. The shock of the cold was so intense it stole her breath. It soaked her thin trousers instantly, a brutal, biting chill that felt like it was freezing her to the floor. Oops, Lyra said, the false innocence in her tone more cutting than any insult. Her friends snickered. Clumsy me. You missed a spot, Omega. A very large spot. Alara gritted her teeth, the pressure in her jaw a counterpoint to the shivering that racked her body. She did not look up. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. Inside, a tiny, stubborn flame flickered. They could humiliate her, starve her, freeze her. But she would not break. That, she swore to herself every single day. They would never, ever break her. Pathetic, Lyra scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. My father is hosting the emissaries from the Winter Guard tonight. The entire hall needs to be spotless. But I have another task for you. She paused, savoring the moment. The frost herbs for the welcoming stew are running low. The kitchens need more. Alara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. The frost herbs grew on the eastern ridge, a treacherous climb even in good weather. In this blizzard, it was a death sentence. But the storm, Alara whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Are you questioning my order? Lyra's smile was a cruel slash. Maybe a night in the ice cells would help you remember your place. Now go, and do not come back until your basket is full. She turned, her heavy cloak swirling, and swept out of the hall with her followers, their laughter echoing behind them. Alara was left alone, shivering violently in a puddle of filth, the order hanging in the air like a guillotine. There was no choice. Refusal meant the ice cells, a slow and certain death. The blizzard was a faster but less certain one. There was a chance, however small, she might survive the storm. There was no chance she would survive the cells. With a resolve born of pure desperation, she pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were numb, her clothes already stiffening with ice. She moved through the back corridors of the hold, a wraith in the shadows, and slipped into the pantry. She grabbed a small woven basket and a thicker, patched-up cloak that another servant had discarded. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. The wind hit her the moment she stepped outside. It was a physical force, a solid wall of ice and fury that shoved her back, stealing the air from her lungs. Snow, thick and wet, plastered against her face, blinding her. The world had dissolved into a maelstrom of white and gray. The path to the eastern ridge was completely gone, buried under a rapidly growing shroud of snow. This was not a normal storm. Lyra had lived her whole life in the northern mountains. She knew the moods of the sky. This felt different. Wrong. There was a malice in the wind, a predatory hunger that had nothing to do with nature. It felt like it was hunting. She bowed her head against the gale, pulling the flimsy cloak tighter. One foot in front of the other. That was the only way. She had a vague sense of direction, a memory of the sun's position from her last trip, and she clung to it. The cold was a living thing now, a beast with frozen fangs that gnawed at her fingers and toes, at the tip of her nose and the lobes of her ears. Pain became a distant hum, replaced by a profound and terrifying numbness. Her world shrank to the next step. The snow was up to her thighs now, each movement a monumental effort. Her lungs burned with every ragged breath. How long had she been out here? An hour? A lifetime? Time had lost all meaning, dissolved in the howling white. She stumbled, her numb foot catching on a hidden root. She fell face first into a deep drift, the snow packing into her mouth and nose, choking her. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her exhaustion. She thrashed, pushing herself up, gasping for air. The basket was gone, lost to the storm. It did not matter. She was lost. She could not go back, could not go forward. A strange sense of calm began to settle over her. The shivering subsided, replaced by a heavy, syrupy warmth that spread through her limbs. She knew what it meant. It was the final lie the cold told you before it claimed you. She stumbled onward for a few more steps before her legs gave out completely. She collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine, sliding down its rough bark to sit in the snow. This was it then. Her end. A short, miserable life, ending alone in a storm. She closed her eyes, the image of Lyra's triumphant sneer the last thing in her mind. A single, frozen tear tracked a path down her cheek. A scent cut through the blizzard's sterile chill. Pine, yes, but something else. Something wild and warm. Wood smoke and winter storms, musk and sheer power. It was primal and terrifying, yet it called to a part of her she did not know existed. Her eyes fluttered open. A shape was resolving itself out of the swirling snow. It was massive, a silhouette of impossible size and breadth. It moved with a silent, fluid grace that defied the deep snow and the raging wind. As it drew closer, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. It was a man, but he was more than any man she had ever seen. He was built on a scale that seemed to belong to mountains and glaciers, broad-shouldered and impossibly tall. He wore dark, heavy furs, and a greatsword was strapped to his back, its hilt stark against the white chaos. His face was all harsh angles and predatory beauty, framed by a mane of black hair dusted with snow. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were not a normal color. They were molten gold, glowing with an internal light, like twin suns burning in the heart of the storm. They scanned the forest before landing on her, and in that instant, the world fell silent. The howl of the wind, the ache in her bones, the creeping warmth of death, it all vanished. There was only the intensity of his gaze. He took a final long stride that brought him to stand over her. He was a titan, a god of this frozen wasteland. Fear, pure and absolute, seized her. This was a predator, and she was a mouse caught in the open. He knelt in the snow before her, his movements economical and precise. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and calloused, and gently brushed the snow from her cheek. The moment his skin touched hers, the world exploded. It was not a sound, it was a feeling, a cataclysm. A wave of searing, unbearable heat shot from the point of contact, a bolt of lightning that traveled up her arm and slammed into her chest. Her heart stopped, then restarted with a jolt so powerful it arched her back. A scream was ripped from her throat, but it was swallowed by the sudden, deafening roar of 1,000 voices in her mind. Visions, feelings, memories that were not hers flooded her. 1,000 years of loneliness, the weight of a crown, the quiet sorrow of an empty throne, the fierce, burning hunt for something lost. She felt his ancient pain, his solitude, his unyielding strength. It was too much. It was everything. A sharp, burning pain erupted on the inside of her left wrist. She cried out, pulling her hand back, cradling it to her chest. She looked down, her vision swimming. There, against her pale, frozen skin, a mark was forming. It bloomed like a black flower, intricate lines of silver and gold light swirling and twisting into a symbol she had never seen before. A stylized wolf's head crowned by a rising sun. It glowed with a soft, ethereal light, pulsing in time with her frantic heartbeat. She stared at it, her mind reeling. What was this? What was happening to her? She looked up at the man, her breath catching in her throat. His golden eyes were no longer just glowing. They were blazing. Twin infernos of shock, recognition, and an emotion so powerful, it buckled her knees. The air around him crackled with raw, untamed energy. He reached for her again, his movements slower this time, as if she were a wild, frightened thing that might bolt. His gaze was locked on her face, his expression a storm of emotion she could not begin to decipher. "You," he breathed, his voice a low rumble, deep as thunder and soft as falling snow. It vibrated through her, a physical touch that resonated in the core of her being. Confusion and terror warred within her. Her body, her very soul, hummed with a strange new energy, a resonance that answered the power rolling off him. It felt like coming home to a place she had never been. It felt like finding a part of herself she never knew was missing. Her instincts screamed one word: mate. But her mind screamed another: danger. This was impossible. This was madness. She was nothing, a worthless omega. He was a king. She could feel it in the authority that radiated from him, the ancient power that clung to him like a cloak. He saw the terror in her eyes. His expression softened, the harsh lines of his face easing into something akin to reverence. He looked from her eyes to the glowing mark on her wrist and back again. "Mine," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of absolute fact, a claim laid upon her soul. The word echoed in the space between them, more binding than any vow, more powerful than any chain. He had found her. After centuries of searching, of ruling alone, of an aching emptiness that mirrored her own, he had found her. Before she could process the word, before she could utter a single protest, the last of her strength gave out. The world tilted, the blazing gold of his eyes the last thing she saw as darkness rushed in to claim her. She was falling, but she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he would catch her. She woke slowly, drifting up from a deep, dreamless black. The first thing she registered was warmth, not the treacherous, deadly warmth of freezing, but a deep, penetrating heat that soaked into her muscles and thawed the chill from her marrow. It was a luxury she had not felt in years, if ever. The second thing was the scent. Wood smoke, pine, and that same intoxicating wild scent of the man from the storm. It was all around her, clinging to the thick furs that were piled on top of her. She was lying on a soft pallet of more furs, and a fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth nearby, casting flickering shadows across the walls of a small, rustic cabin. Panic flared, hot and immediate. Where was she? Who brought her here? The memories rushed back, the blizzard, the collapse, the massive man with golden eyes, the bond, the mark. Her head whipped to the side, her eyes searching the small space. He was there. He sat in a large wooden chair near the fire, watching her. He was not sharpening a blade or mending his gear. His stillness was absolute, his entire focus on her. The golden eyes held her, their intensity undiminished. Alara scrambled backward, pressing herself against the rough-hewn log wall at her back, pulling the furs up to a chin like a shield. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He did not move from his chair, but his voice, when he spoke, filled the small cabin. "You are safe." It was that same deep, resonant timbre that settled deep in her chest. Safe? She had been abducted from her pack's lands by a stranger who radiated more power than her alpha ever had. A stranger who had somehow burned a glowing brand onto her skin. How could she possibly be safe? "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you want?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, though it did not reach his eyes. "I am Kale, and what I want," he said, his gaze dropping to her left hand, which was clutching the furs, "I already have." She followed his gaze. The mark on her wrist was still there, a stark black and silver against her skin. The glow had faded, but the lines were sharp and clear, an undeniable truth etched into her flesh. A wave of dizziness washed over her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What did you do to me?" "I did nothing," Kale replied, his voice soft but firm. "The bond did this. It has waited for us, for the moment we would finally touch. The bond." The word sent another shiver through her, this one unrelated to the cold. It sounded like a cage. "I don't understand." He rose from the chair, and the true scale of him was once again apparent. He filled the room, a force of nature contained within four walls. He moved toward her slowly, his steps deliberate. Alara pressed herself harder against the wall, her knuckles white as she gripped the furs. "You are my mate," he stated, stopping a few feet from the pallet. "The other half of my soul. I have waited for you for a very, very long time." Mate. Soul. The words were from old stories, from legends whispered by the elders. Fated mates were a myth, a fairy tale for children. And even if they were real, they were for powerful alphas, for nobles, for anyone but her. She was an omega, a nothing. No, she choked out, shaking her head. You're wrong. It's a mistake. I'm nobody. The word worthless hung unspoken in the air between them. You are Lyra, he said, and the way he spoke her name was a caress, as if it were something precious. And you are everything. His certainty was terrifying. It flew in the face of everything she had ever known, every insult, every blow, every moment of her miserable existence. Could her entire life have been a lie? Could she be wanted? The thought was so alien, so overwhelming that her mind shied away from it. He seemed to understand her turmoil. He did not press closer. The storm has passed. You need to eat, rest. The bond has taken its toll on you. He gestured to a small wooden bowl on the hearth. It was filled with a thick, fragrant stew. The smell made her stomach clench with a hunger so sharp it was painful. He retreated to his chair, giving her space. The gesture was one of consideration, but his eyes never left her. He was watching her, guarding her. The possessiveness in his gaze was a tangible thing, a cloak of heat and shadow that settled over her. Hesitantly, she reached for the bowl. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. The stew was rich with meat and herbs, and it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She ate quickly, ravenously, unable to stop herself. When the bowl was empty, a profound exhaustion settled over her. Sleep, Kale's voice commanded softly from across the room. No one will harm you here. Despite her fear, despite the utter madness of her situation, she believed him. Her body, now warm and fed, betrayed her. Her eyelids grew heavy. Curled under the heavy furs that smelled of him, of safety and power, she drifted back to sleep, the image of his blazing golden eyes burning in her mind. Meanwhile, back at the Stone Fang hold, Lyra was fuming. The blizzard had broken as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine, silent snow. There was no sign of the Omega. Good. The little wretch had probably frozen to death, exactly as she deserved. But a nagging curiosity aided her. She wanted to be sure. She wanted to imagine Alara's frozen corpse, a final, satisfying victory. Bundling herself in her finest furs, she ventured out, telling her father she was merely getting some air. The lie came easily. She followed the faint traces of the path toward the eastern ridge. It was not long before she found the tracks. A single set of small, stumbling footprints, nearly erased by the storm. And then, farther on, they were joined by another set. Lyra's eyes widened. These new tracks were huge, the stride long and powerful. A massive wolf, perhaps? No. The print was humanoid. A man. A very large man. Her heart began to beat faster. Who else would be out in that storm? She followed the dual tracks, which led away from the ridge and deeper into the ancient woods that bordered their territory. They ended at a small, secluded cabin she had never known existed. It was old, but well kept, with a thin tendril of smoke curling from its chimney. Her jealousy, a venomous and constant thing, flared. Had that pathetic Omega found shelter? Had some trapper taken her in? Lyra crept closer, her movements silent in the deep snow. She circled the cabin, looking for a way to see inside. A small window, its shutter slightly askew, offered a narrow glimpse. She peered through the gap, and her blood ran cold. The Omega, Lyra, was there, asleep on a bed of furs. But it was the man sitting by the fire who stole her breath. She recognized him instantly from the emissary's descriptions, from the legends. The harsh, beautiful face, the sheer, intimidating size, the aura of ancient, absolute power. It was him. Chaol, the Alpha King of the North, the supreme leader of all the packs. Why? Why would the Alpha King be here, in a hidden cabin on their lands, with her? It made no sense. Lyra's gaze fell upon Alara again. The Omega shifted in her sleep, her left hand falling away from the furs. For a single, stunning moment, Lyra saw it. A mark on the inside of her wrist, a complex, swirling design that seemed to absorb the firelight. A claiming mark. The realization hit her like a physical blow. No, it was impossible. It could not be. That worthless, filthy, insignificant creature was the fated mate of the Alpha King? The queen of them all? A wave of rage so potent it made her dizzy washed over Lyra. It should have been her. She was the daughter of an Alpha. She was beautiful, strong, worthy. She had dreamed of catching the eye of a powerful mate, of ruling, and this scrap of nothing had stolen it all. A new thought, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, cut through her fury. This was information. Powerful information. There were those who would pay dearly for it. Those who hated the Alpha King, who sought to usurp his throne. The whispers of the Ember Covenant, a shadowy faction led by a rival king, were known even in the isolation of Stonefang. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. If she could not be queen, she would be the one to destroy the queen. She backed away from the cabin, her mind racing. She knew who to contact. There was a merchant who passed through their territory, a man with cold eyes and a reputation for dealing in secrets as much as spices. He was an agent for the Covenant. Alara would not be queen. Lyra would see her dead, and she would enjoy every moment of the Alpha King's pain when he lost his precious, fated mate. For 2 days, Alara existed in a strange limbo. Chaol tended to her with a quiet, intense focus. He brought her food, kept the fire roaring, and spoke little, content to simply watch her. The fear had not vanished, but it was joined by a bewildering sense of peace. In his presence, the gnawing anxiety that had been her constant companion for 18 years began to recede. Her body healed. The raw skin on her hands grew smooth. The gauntness in her cheeks lessened. The bond hummed between them, a silent conversation beneath the surface. She could feel his emotions as a subtle pressure in her own mind, a deep, resonant satisfaction, a fierce protectiveness, and a thread of ancient sorrow that was slowly, so slowly, beginning to fade. He never touched her after that first cataclysmic moment. It was as if he understood that she was still a wild thing, poised to flee. He gave her space, but his presence was a constant possessive weight. She was his. The knowledge was terrifying and, in a way she could not admit to herself, thrilling. On the 3rd morning, he rose as the sun was casting pale light across the snow. "I need to hunt," he said, his voice pulling her from a light doze. "The wards on this cabin will hold. Nothing can enter. You will be safe." He donned his heavy furs and strapped the massive sword to his back. He was power incarnate, a warrior king ready for battle. He paused at the door, his golden eyes meeting hers. "I will not be long." Then he was gone, the door closing with a soft click behind him. The cabin suddenly felt too large, too empty. The silence was heavier without his presence to fill it. A strange pang of loss, sharp and unexpected, struck her. She pushed it down. She was not safe. She was a prisoner, no matter how comfortable the cage. An hour passed, then another. Alara paced the small cabin, her nerves stretched taut. The wards Cale spoke of made the air feel thick, but they did little to soothe her anxiety. Something felt wrong. A prickling sensation on the back of her neck, a return of the oppressive malice she had felt in the storm. Suddenly, the air shimmered. The protective wards around the cabin flared, a visible distortion like heat haze, and then shattered with a sound like breaking glass. The oppressive feeling intensified tenfold, crashing down on her. It was cold, dark, and filled with hate. The door burst inward, ripped from its hinges and thrown across the room to smash against the far wall. 5 figures stood in the doorway, clad in black leather armor trimmed with dull gray metal. Their faces were hidden by snarling iron masks, and the air around them stank of ash and blood. Ember Covenant. The name sprang to her mind, a whisper from the bond, a warning from Cale's own knowledge. In their center stood a man without a mask. He was tall and lean, with pale skin and hair the color of ash. His eyes were chips of black ice, devoid of any warmth or light. He held a length of chain in his hands, and Alara's eyes widened in horror. Silver. The dull gleam was unmistakable. His cold eyes swept the cabin, dismissed the expensive furs, and landed on her. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. There you are, the little lost queen. Alara backed away, her heart seizing with terror. Stay away from me. The man, Malik, she knew his name with a sickening certainty, laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. Cale is not here to protect you now. We have you, and through you, we will have him. His soldiers fanned out, their movements swift and practiced. Alara looked for an escape, but there was none. She was trapped. She thought of Cale, sending a desperate, silent plea down the bond. Cale! One of the soldiers lunged. She dodged, her instincts surprisingly fast, but another grabbed her from behind, his arms like iron bands around her. She struggled, kicking and twisting, but it was useless. Malik approached her, the silver chain dangling from his hand. A pretty little mark, he said, his gaze fixed on her wrist. A symbol of his power, his connection to the life of the land. It is a pity we will have to sever it. He reached for her, and she fought with renewed desperation, a wild animal in a trap. The soldier holding her grunted with effort. Malik's cold fingers closed around her wrist, directly over the bond mark. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It was not the searing heat of the bond's creation, but a soul-deep, agonizing cold. It felt like he was plunging her hand into a vat of liquid nitrogen while simultaneously ripping a part of her soul from her body. A scream tore from her lungs, raw and filled with agony. The bond, the beautiful, warm connection to Cale, wavered and grew thin, like a thread stretched to its breaking point. His presence in her mind, a constant warmth for the past 3 days, flickered and dimmed, replaced by a wave of his distant, roaring fury and pain. Malik wrapped the silver chain around her wrist, cinching it tight. The cold intensified, a constant, gnawing torment that radiated up her arm and into her chest. The world began to gray at the edges. Take her, Malik commanded. The king will follow, and we will be ready for him. She was dragged from the cabin, from the warmth and the safety that had been a brief, impossible dream. They threw her onto a horse, tying her hands. The last thing she saw as they rode away was the ruined doorway of the little cabin, a dark, empty mouth in the snow. Hope died within her, frozen by the silver's chilling touch. The journey was a blur of pain and misery. The silver chain was a source of constant, excruciating cold that leached her strength and frayed her connection to Kale. She could feel him, a distant point of raging golden light, but he was faint, so faint. The bond that had felt like a steel cable was now a spider's thread, and the terror of its snapping was worse than any physical pain. They traveled for a day and a night, stopping only to change horses at hidden posts. Her captors did not speak to her, treating her like a parcel. They finally arrived at a fortress carved from black mountain rock, a jagged wound in the snow-covered landscape. It radiated the same cold, malicious energy as Malik. This was his stronghold, the heart of the Ember Covenant. She was dragged through torchlit corridors of dark stone and thrown into a cell. The door, a solid slab of iron, boomed shut, plunging her into near-total darkness. The only light was a faint sliver from under the door. The silver chain was removed from her wrist, but another, heavier set of silver manacles was clamped around both wrists and chained to the wall. The agonizing cold remained, a permanent feature of the damp, frigid cell. The bond was a ghost, a whisper. She tried to reach for Kael, to feel his presence, but it was like shouting into a hurricane. There was only a vast, terrifying silence in her soul where he had been. Despair, black and suffocating, washed over her. Lyra's word echoed in her mind. Worthless. This was her fate. To be a pawn in a game of kings. To die alone in the dark, a tool to be used and discarded. Tears streamed down her face, silent tracks in the grime. She had been given a glimpse of heaven, a moment of being seen, of being wanted, only to have it ripped away. Hours or days later, the cell door opened. Malik stood there, silhouetted by the torchlight from the hall. He entered carrying a small stool and sat down just beyond her reach. "You are wondering what this is all about," he said, his voice smooth and conversational. It made her skin crawl. "It is simple, really. Kale's power is tied to the land, to life itself. It is an ancient, tiresome thing. My power comes from shadow, from entropy, from the beautiful, inevitable decay of all things." He leaned forward, his black eyes gleaming. But his connection gives him an advantage, an anchor. And the final, strongest piece of that anchor is his fated mate. The Sun Queen of the old prophecies, he smiled. That's you. Alara stared at him, her mind numb with shock. Sun Queen? It was absurd. You, my dear, are the key, Malik continued, enjoying his monologue. With you in my possession, I can perform a ritual. I will not sever your bond, oh no, that is far too simple. I will corrupt it. I will pour my shadow into you, turning you into a conduit of darkness. Your bond will become a weapon, poisoning Kale from the inside out. It will sever his connection to the land and leave him hollow, powerless. Then, I will kill him and take his throne. The sheer, calculated evil of his plan was breathtaking. He wanted to use her, to turn the most beautiful thing she had ever known into a weapon to destroy the one person who had ever looked at her and seen something of value. He will find me, she whispered, her voice a raw rasp. Malik laughed. Oh, I am counting on it. He is coming. I can feel his rage shaking the very mountains. He will walk right into my trap, and you will be the bait. He stood up, his speech concluded. The ritual begins at moonrise. Try not to despair too much. Your pain will only make the corruption stronger. The door boomed shut again, leaving her in the crushing dark. His words echoed in the silence. Poison. Corruption. She would be the instrument of Cale's destruction. The thought was more horrifying than her own death. No, she would not let it happen. The tiny, stubborn flame of defiance that had kept her alive in Stonefang flickered once more. It was small and weak, but it was there. She would not be his weapon. She closed her eyes, shutting out the cold and the dark of the cell. She turned her focus inward, searching for the ghost of the bond. She pushed past the chilling agony of the silver, past the despair, past the fear. She called his name in the silent depths of her soul. Cale. For a long moment there was nothing, only the echoing emptiness. She tried again, pouring every ounce of her will, of her desperation, of the strange new love that had taken root in her heart into the call. Cale! And then, a flicker. A tiny spark of golden light in the vast darkness. It was him. Faint, distant, but there. Hold on. The words were not sound. They were pure feeling, a wave of warmth and unshakable resolve that pushed back the cold for a single, blessed second. His voice, a whisper in her soul. I am coming. The connection faded, the darkness and the cold rushing back in. But it was enough. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. He was coming. She just had to hold on. She would not let Malik win. She would fight. The fortress of Nagath, Malik's black heart, stood silent under the rising moon. Inside, Alara was dragged from her cell and taken to a vast, circular chamber. The air was frigid, and the stone floor was carved with a complex array of dark runes that seemed to drink the torchlight. In the center of the chamber, she was forced onto a cold stone altar. Malik stood before her, his black eyes alight with triumph. His followers, the masked soldiers of the Ember Covenant, formed a circle around the chamber, their chanting a low, guttural drone that made the stones vibrate. The moon is at its apex, Malik announced, his voice echoing in the vast space. The Alpha King is at our gates. Let the ritual begin. He raised his hands and shadows writhed around him, coalescing into tangible tendrils of darkness. They slithered across the floor, crawling up the sides of the altar toward her. They felt like ice and decay, and she shrank from their touch, her skin crawling. Just as the first tendril of shadow touched her leg, the entire fortress shook. A deafening roar, more animal than man, echoed from outside, a sound of pure apocalyptic fury that rattled the teeth. It was Cale. An instant later, the northern wall of the chamber exploded inward. Rock and shrapnel flew through the air as a colossal figure smashed through the stone. Cale stood there, framed by the moonlit snow, his golden eyes blazing with white-hot rage. He was no longer a king. He was a god of vengeance. Behind him, his Winter Guard warriors poured into the chamber, their silver axes and swords a blur of motion as they crashed into the Covenant soldiers. The chamber erupted into chaos. The clang of steel, the shouts of warriors, the snarls of pain and fury filled the air. Cale moved like a storm, his greatsword a whirlwind of death. He cut down 3 Covenant soldiers in a single, fluid motion, his eyes never leaving the altar, never leaving her. Malik sneered, undeterred. "Too late, old wolf," he screamed over the din of battle. "The ritual is begun. She is mine." He thrust his hands forward, and the shadow tendrils surged, wrapping around Alara's limbs, holding her fast. A new kind of pain, a corrupting, soul-twisting agony, flooded her as the shadow magic began to seep into her, trying to find the bond. Kale roared again and charged, carving a path directly toward the altar. But Malik was prepared. He threw up a hand, and a wall of solid shadow erupted from the floor, blocking Kale's path. Kale slammed into it with the force of an avalanche, the dark magic cracking but holding. Malik turned his full attention back to Alara. "Now, little queen," he hissed, his face close to hers. "Let's poison your king." He placed his hands on her chest, and the full force of his dark power poured into her. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined. It was the feeling of her soul being unmade, dissolved, corrupted. The bond shrieked in her mind, a high, keening wail of agony. She felt Kale's own agony through it, a backlash of her pain that made him stagger back from the shadow wall. He was in danger because of her. He was being hurt because of her. Something inside her snapped. The tiny, stubborn flame of defiance did not just flicker, it exploded. Rage, pure and incandescent, a protective fury she had never known she possessed, erupted from the core of her being. It was rage for Kale, rage at Malik, rage for every moment of her life she had been called worthless, for every time she had been made to feel like nothing. She was not nothing. She was his. She was the other half of a king's soul. She was a queen. "No!" The word was not a whisper. It was a roar of power that shook the chamber, a sonic boom of pure will. And her power, the hidden, dormant magic she never knew she had, answered. It was not shadow. It was light. Pure, brilliant, life-giving light. It erupted from her body in a blinding wave, a sun going nova in the heart of the dark fortress. The light was not hot. It was warm, like the first day of spring, and it smelled of new growth and clean rain. The shadow tendrils holding her vaporized, turning to smoke and dust. Malik was thrown backward, screaming as the pure light seared his skin, his dark magic unraveling in its presence. The silver manacles on her wrists glowed white-hot and then melted into slag, freeing her. The wave of light expanded, washing over the entire chamber. The Winter Guard warriors felt a surge of strength and vitality, their wounds knitting closed. The Covenant soldiers, creatures of shadow and hate, shrieked as the light burned them, their dark armor cracking, their resolve breaking. Kale's shadow wall dissolved into mist. He stared, his golden eyes wide with awe, as Alara sat up on the altar, wreathed in a corona of golden white light. She was magnificent, terrifying, beautiful. She slid off the altar, her bare feet landing softly on the stone floor. The light coalesced around her, no longer a wave, but a shimmering aura that moved with her. Her eyes, once the color of a winter sky, now glowed with the same inner fire as Kale's, a soft silver gold light. Malik scrambled to his feet, his face burned, his black eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "What are you?" he rasped. Alara looked at him, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear, only a calm, righteous fury. "You called me worthless," she said, her voice clear and ringing with power. "You called me a tool, a key. You were wrong." She raised a hand, and a spear of pure light formed in her palm. "I am Alara. I am the Sun Queen, and you will not touch him." She thrust her hand forward, and the spear of light shot across the room. Malik threw up a desperate shield of shadow, but the light pierced it as if it were paper. It struck him in the chest, and he gave one last, agonized scream, as the light consumed him, unraveling his shadow-stitched soul until nothing was left but a pile of ash on the stone floor. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the panting of the victorious Winter Guard. The remaining Covenant soldiers had either fled or been cut down. The battle was over. The light around Lyra faded, her strength leaving her in a sudden rush. Her legs buckled. Before she could fall, strong arms were around her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Cale held her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. He was shaking, not from exertion, but from the terror of nearly losing her. He held her tight, a desperate, possessive grip that was not painful, but grounding. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I have you." She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her face against the warm, solid strength of his chest. The scent of him, pine and winter storm and power, filled her senses, chasing away the last of the fear, the last of the cold. The bond between them flared to life, stronger and brighter than ever before, a blazing sun in her soul. "You came for me," she whispered, her voice choked with tears of relief. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his golden eyes intense and full of a love so profound it stole her breath. He cupped her face in his large, warm hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I would tear down the world for you, Lyra." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she saw no trace of the awe or fear of her power. He saw only her, the woman who was the other half of his soul. He did not see a Sun Queen or a weapon. He saw his mate. "You were never worthless," he said, his voice a raw, fierce whisper. "You were a queen waiting to be found." In that moment, she finally believed it. The brand of worthlessness on her soul dissolved, washed away by the tide of his love and her own newfound strength. She was not a ghost. She was not a burden. She was a force of nature. A new feeling rose in her, a mirror of the possessiveness she felt from him. He was hers, as much as she was his. She reached up, her fingers tracing the harsh line of his jaw. She poured her own will, her own love, her own claim back into the bond. He gasped, his eyes widening as a new heat spread through him. On the side of his neck, just below his jaw, a mark bloomed into existence. It was the mirror image of her own, a wolf's head crowned by a rising sun. It glowed with a silver light, a perfect complement to the golden glow that now pulsed from the mark on her own wrist. The bond was complete, forged in ice, tested in shadow, and now sealed in light. A slow smile spread across Cale's face, a true smile that reached his blazing eyes and transformed his harsh features into something breathtakingly beautiful. It was like watching the sunrise after a long, dark night. "Mine," he growled softly, the word a purr of pure satisfaction. "Mine," she answered, her voice steady and sure. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of frantic relief, but one of deep, soul-binding certainty. It was a promise, a vow, and a homecoming all at once. The world fell away, and there was only the two of them, two halves of a single soul, finally made whole. The journey back to Cale's true seat of power, the citadel of Winter's heart, was nothing like her abduction. She rode with him on the back of his massive warhorse, wrapped in his arms and cocooned in warm furs. The Winter Guard formed a respectful, silent escort around them. They no longer looked through her, but at her, their gazes filled with a mixture of reverence and loyalty. The citadel was not a dark fortress like Malik's, but a breathtaking structure of white stone and gleaming ice that seemed to have grown from the mountain itself. It soared into the sky, its towers catching the sunlight and shattering it into a million rainbows. As they approached, the great gates swung open, and the people of his kingdom poured out. They lined the path, thousands of them, warriors, families, elders, and children. When they saw Kael, a great cheer went up, but when they saw her, held securely in his arms, a hush fell over the crowd. They saw the new mark on their king's neck, the glowing brand on her wrist. They saw the way he looked at her. Kael dismounted, lifting her down to stand beside him. He kept one arm securely around her waist, holding her to his side. He faced his people, his voice booming across the silent square. "People of the North! For centuries I have led you alone. For centuries our throne has been but half full. No longer." He turned his gaze upon her, his golden eyes soft and filled with pride. "Behold Lyra, my mate, your queen." He presented her to them, and as one, the thousands gathered in the square knelt. The gesture was not one of fear, but of profound respect. They knelt to their king and to the Sun Queen who had returned to them, the woman whose light had been prophesied to bring a new age of peace and strength. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. She, who had spent her life being invisible, being scorned, was now the center of a kingdom's hope. She looked at the faces of the people, at the warriors of the Winter Guard, and at the powerful, beautiful man standing beside her, his warmth a solid, comforting presence. She was no longer cold. She was no longer alone. She had found her power. She had found her mate. She had found her family. She was home.